All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're going to tackle one of those super common check engine codes for Subaru owners, P0353. Now, if that code just popped up on your scanner, don't panic. In this explainer, we're going to break down exactly what it means and, more importantly, how you can actually go about fixing it. Okay, let's dive in.
So I'm guessing that little orange light is staring back at you from the dashboard, right? And maybe your car it doesn't feel right. It might feel a little shaky or maybe kind of sluggish. If that sounds familiar, you are in exactly the right place. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Okay, first things first. Before we can even think about fixing a problem, we've got to understand what it is. So what exactly is this P0353 code that your car's computer is trying to tell you?
Whoa, okay, that is a mouthful. Ignition coil C primary/secondary circuit malfunction. It sounds really technical, I know, but all this is, really, is the official language coming from your car's brain, the engine control module, or ECM. So let's translate that into plain English and figure out what's really going on under the hood.
You know, just think about it this way. Your engine needs three basic things to run. It needs fuel, it needs air, and it needs a spark to ignite it all. Well, the ignition coil is the part that creates that super powerful spark. This code, P0353, is basically your car's computer waving a flag and saying, hey, the electrical circuit for the spark plug in cylinder C has a problem. And if that spark is weak, or maybe it's not there at all, your engine just can't run the way it's supposed to. It's really as simple as that.
All right, let's move on and talk about how this problem actually feels when you're in the driver's seat. Because, the code is one thing, but the symptoms, that's what you're going to notice day to day. The two biggest clues you're going to get are a rough idle and just, poor performance. When you're stopped at a traffic light, does the engine feel like it's shaking or sputtering? That is a classic sign. And then, when you're actually driving, does it feel kind of sluggish when you hit the gas, or maybe it hesitates a bit? That's because your engine literally isn't firing on all cylinders, and you can absolutely feel that loss of power.
Okay, this is the real heart of our explainer. We know what the code means, we know what it feels like, so now let's figure out why it's happening. We're going to go through this just like a pro mechanic would, starting with the simplest, easiest fixes and working our way up.
Seriously, before you start thinking about buying expensive parts, always start right here. Could this whole headache be caused by something as simple as a blown fuse? Or maybe a connector is just a little bit loose or dirty? What about the spark plugs? Are they just old and worn out? Checking these three things first could save you a ton of time, money, and frustration. Okay, don't be intimidated by this list, I promise. Just think of this as our complete roadmap. It's our master checklist. Let's kind of break it down. See, up at the top, you've got the really simple stuff, like a blown fuse or a bad connection on a connector. These are your easy first checks, and honestly, they're often the most common culprits. Then, we get into potential wiring issues, like what they call an open or a short circuit in the wiring harness. And finally, way at the bottom, we've got the possibility of faulty parts, like the relay, the spark plug, or the ignition coil itself. We're going to touch on these categories one by one, but this slide right here, this is your go-to reference for every single possibility. It's funny. So many of the potential causes on our list boil down to this one simple problem. Just a bad connection. A connector that's a little bit loose or maybe has some corrosion on it. Whether it's on a relay or between two wires, that can be the entire issue. And a lot of the time, the fix is as simple as unplugging it, cleaning the contacts, and plugging it back in nice and snug. It's a perfect example of how a tiny physical problem can create a huge electronic headache. So this next category is all about the wires themselves, the wiring harness. You could have a wire that's rubbed through its insulation and is shorting out against a piece of metal, or a wire could have broken completely, which creates an open circuit. Now, this takes a little more detective work. You can start with just a good visual inspection. Look for any wires that look frayed, melted, or damaged. For those of you who are a bit more advanced, this is where you might break out a multimeter to check for continuity. And finally, after you've ruled out all the bad connections and you're sure the wiring is okay, then you can start to think that maybe a part has just, failed. It could be a simple blown fuse, a bad relay, a worn-out spark plug, or the ignition coil itself. But the good news is, because you systematically checked everything else first, you can be way more confident that you're replacing the right part, instead of just throwing money at it and guessing. Okay, so we've defined the problem, we've identified the symptoms, and we've walked through a whole diagnostic checklist. So what's the big takeaway here to get your Subaru running smoothly again? This quote from our source material really just hits the nail on the head. The key to fixing this code isn't about guesswork, and it's not about throwing expensive parts at the problem hoping one of them sticks. It's about understanding the possible causes and then following a logical process, just like the one we've laid out. That's how you get to an effective and permanent fix. So, I'll leave you with this one thought. Before you pick up the phone and book that expensive appointment, just pop the hood, take a look. Is that connector on the ignition coil pushed in all the way? Is the fuse good? You've now got the knowledge to do those first critical checks yourself. And who knows, that 5 minutes you spend might be all it takes to solve the problem. Thanks for joining me.